Hey guys, how's it going?
Is that a trick, Yo-Yo?
Why isn't my yo-yo coming back up?
Can you walk the dog? The Offset Yo-Yo Podcast.
Hey guys, how's it going? So, another episode of the Offset Yo-Yo Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Vu, two-time Australian National Yo-Yo Champion and Yoyoing YouTuber. Okay, today's guest is super exciting. Today we're interviewing Andre Boulay. If you guys don't know who that is, you've been living under a rock. You're not in the yo-yoing scene. Andre has had such a monumental impact on the yo-yoing scene. It is crazy. My personal experience was I started yo-yoing in 2009. And then how I started was I got the Yo-Yo Jam Legacy, which was unresponsive Yo-Yo Jam Yo-Yo. That also happened to be designed by Andre. And I looked up yo-yoing tutorials, found Andre's tutorials on Expert Village, and basically crunched through all of those. And that was how I had the foundational trick set that basically allows me to play the way I do today. So if I could credit anyone to teach me, anyone who taught me how to yo-yo, it would be Andre. And a lot of players from my generation who started around the same time I did would probably say the same. That being said, even though Andre had this huge impact on basically my entire yo-yoing ability, I didn't really know much about him on a personal level. So this was a super interesting interview for me to kind of uncover the man himself. So Andre has had a super long relationship with yo-yoing. Throughout this interview, we discussed everything from how he got started to ultimately his competitive go at things. Like, I didn't really know much about Andre's competitive career. We then talk about how he got onto Yo-Yo Jam, how he became team captain, what it was like designing Dark Magic, what was his setup on the Dark Magic. We talk a little bit about the Yo-Yo Jam Legacy, which was just, my personal interest. And then we kind of just mix and match in between. And Andre has had such a long yo-yo career that this was more of a history lesson for me as well. And it also kind of doubled up on how things used to be. So I think we discuss how yo-yoing transitioned from one thing to the next. And we also talk about Yo-Yo Expert. We talk about how Yo-Yo Expert began and how ultimately Andre worked to create what it is today. So it's a super long and wide-ranging episode. One other thing I'd like to shout out, I'm going to be doing an AMA on Yo-Yo Expert. So you guys are going to have the opportunity to ask me literally anything. If you guys want to keep it about yo-yoing, you can do that, or you can ask me about anything else. I'm pretty bad at everything else, so I don't know how much my advice will be on other things, but yes, I'm going to be on the Yo-Yo Expert forums from the 31st of May till the 2nd of June, Sydney time, and go ahead, take a look at Yo-Yo Expert for more information on that. I'll be answering the questions, and there's also a few signed variants that I sent to Andre up for grabs. I'm not sure how he'll distribute those just yet, but that's also going to be super exciting. So you guys can go ahead and check that out. But without further ado, I know you guys want to hear the man himself. So please enjoy my super wide-ranging conversation with the man himself, Andre Boulay. Hi, Andre. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Brandon. Thanks for having me.
Before we get started on this, I just want to publicly thank you for everything that you do. But me and probably hundreds of thousands of other yo-yoers owe their yo-yoing ability to you. So just wanted to the fact that I'm even talking right now to you, the person who taught me how to yo-yo, is crazy.
It's a two-way street there. I'm also very thankful to everyone who's kind of allowed me to kind of make a job out of yo-yoing. And I was lucky enough to be able to start that at a pretty young age, and be able to do a lot of crazy traveling and do a lot of cool things, all because of yo-yo and because people supported what I did and connected with me and stuff like that. So, without people like you and like, yeah, I totally appreciate that. And I appreciate that people can see, that I've had an impact and much at the same time, I wouldn't have had the impact had it not been for people like embracing Yoyo, around me and everything. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think it's crazy to think how many people you've probably impacted. I mean, I remember I was with a friend of mine, and he's a pretty skeptical kind of guy. He doesn't really get excited over a lot of stuff, but we were in Tokyo, and then we kind of bumped into you and Eric Koloski, and he was just dumbfounded. He's like, "Oh, my heroes." And it was this most skeptical guy that's always like, "Oh, such and such is overrated." But when he was like,
I wish I remembered this moment.
Gosh, I'm sure it happens to you on like a daily basis whenever you meet yo-yo players. But yeah, it was Imran Tia for any of the Australian guys who are watching this. But
oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, it never gets old though. Like I still very much appreciate that interaction.
Yeah.
Being a yo-yo celebrity is always like kind of the best of both worlds. Cause you get to walk out into the public and you're a normal person. But then like you walk into like a yo-yo scene and all of a sudden people are like, "Oh my God, like you're so-and-so and it's amazing." And you get that little bit of like, oh, this is what it feels like to be this famous person. And then you get to walk away from it. It's the best of both worlds, honestly. So,
and I think as far as yo-yo celebrity goes, I think you're definitely up there, especially for, because it's odd. I'm actually a little bit nervous to have this conversation. I was talking with like Gentry and Marcus, and they're like world champs, but I don't know. It was like they didn't teach me how to yo-yo, so it very much feels like I'm talking to the master, meet your maker, so to speak. It's very surreal for me.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that. It is always interesting how, like, when you learn something from somebody, regardless of like, who they are, what level they're at or whatever, like that interaction of learning a skill from somebody like has such a huge impact on you personally in terms of how you look at that person and stuff. And I mean, much the same for me too, like in all the different realms, like whether it's photography or tech, computers. I do a lot of stuff where like I learn how to do all sorts of random weird automation tech things in my computer. And there's a few people like I follow, and that happens, right? When you get like obsessed with something and you learn from those people, like those people become kind of bigger than life. And when you actually get to meet them, it's like, wow. But it's also good to remember we're all just normal people, and we're just doing what we love to do. So you don't need to be nervous.
well, thank you for the reassurance. So a question that I really want to start off with is,
sure.
What was the very beginning of your yo-yoing journey? Who was your Andre? Like, how did you learn to yo-yo?
Yeah, great question. So, I started in early 2000. It was kind of right around when yo-yoing wasn't cool anymore. Back in 1998, 1999, the United States had like the big yo-yo boom. It's when THP was really big. Evan Nagau's father was a huge force behind that. Pro-yo was really big, and across the country, it was just a boom. They could not ship and sell yo-yos fast enough. There was such a high demand. And it very quickly crashed, at the end of 98 into 99. And, yo-yos were available for sale for like $1 at every toy store in the United States you went to. And it just wasn't cool anymore. Like, kids had decided it was cool in 98. Everybody had a Omega Fireball. And all of a sudden, 99, 2000, if you were caught dead with a yo-yo, like it just wasn't a cool thing anymore. And that for some reason was when I decided to think it was really cool. Very contrarian. And I got really lucky, because there is this awesome toy store that's in our area. That funny enough, like me and my wife now own and run. But we my mother and my brother went to the toy store because she had found out that they did yo-yo classes, and she actually wanted to bring my little brother. I guess I was 13 or 14 at the time. And he's 5 years younger than me. So I think he was like around 9. And at the class, even to this day, we usually kind of focus on like between 8 to 12 years old. That's a lot of the kids that are coming. So at the time, I kind of was like, had no interest in yo-yo, to be completely honest. I clearly remember we visited this store and there was a kid at the case, because they have a whole case of yo-yos on display. And I remember watching him at the case, looking at the yo-yos very obsessively, as we all do. And then I watched him like throw the yo-yo down and bring it back up. And all I remember thinking was like, not to be mean, but like, wow, what a nerd. Like I would never be caught dead doing that. Like I had this whole thought in my head. And the people at the register fixed the yo-yo for my brother, and we left and came back another day for the yo-yo class. And I still remember, like, to this day, my mom's like, "Oh, do you want to come with us?" And I'm like, "Not really, but like if we're going to the toy store, like maybe I'll find something cool, right?" But I'm not going to pick up a yo-yo. So we bring him to the class, and my brother starts kind of learning how to do it. And there was this really great teacher at the class whose name was Jim Botello, and he was a amazing teacher. And I remember standing on the sidelines, like watching my brother, and he came up to me and he's like, "Hey, like, you got to learn how to yo-yo. You're here. You got to learn how to yo-yo." And I just remember being like, I'm okay. And he really kind of challenged me. And at the time it was funny because the other yo-yo my mom had brought with us was a Omega Brain. And I had gotten it. I still remember to this day, I got it for Christmas one morning. Wow. And it was a clear Omega Brain. It was like one of the original ones. It had this like really crazy gold print on the side from Fall River, Massachusetts. It was one of the originals. Gosh. And I could never get it to work. I didn't know how it worked. There was like a knot around the axle. So he like fixed it, put a string on it, and kind of, taught me how to throw. And there was something funny about that yo-yo though, because the clutch mechanism inside it had actually broken. Oh. So it was almost impossible to get it to sleep. And he even tried it and he could barely get it to sleep, but it was the yo-yo I had with me. So he left it with me. And my brother at the time, again, 5 years younger, I was always pretty competitive, of course, as brothers are, Yeah. He got better at throwing than I did quite quickly. And I kind of just got obsessed at that point to get this thing to spin at the end of the string. And, it was something too. It was a revelation to me that yo-yos could spin at the end of the string, because as far as I knew up until that point in time, I just thought they went up and down. I didn't know they could spin at the end. So I went home, stole my brother's fireball, and I just shot through the list of tricks as fast as I could, started going to the classes, and it just kind of took off from there. Gosh. So, to me, like my first teacher there was Jim.
And sorry, what was his Jim?
Jim Botello.
Okay.
So he's not really into the yo-yo scene anymore. He, at the time, I think he was going to college in the area. And he was working at the store just kind of as an employee at the toy store. Okay. So he found yo-yo through the toy store. Most of the people that were teaching yo-yo there kind of just fell into it. Another person who actually got his start at A to Z, which is a toy store, it's A to Z Science and Learning.
I was about to ask that as well.
A to Z Science and Learning in Northampton, Massachusetts. And we still, to this day, we teach yo-yo classes 3 days a week. And so Jim Botello, and then Brett Uchkunis, who was a pretty famous yo-yo player, especially at that time. And he still goes around, does a ton of shows and stuff like that. Uch.
Right. Also known as
Uch. That's kind of his personality too, and everything like that.
That was that's probably what I'm familiar with. I was like, who's this? And I'm like, oh, him, right?
Uch.
I'm super surprised that was how you began yo-yoing, because you seem like this incredibly passionate guy about yo-yoing, and you kind of it started out of spite. And actually thinking about my own story, it is remarkably similar. I also started off with a variation of the brain, and I also had a younger cousin who had the yo-yo that could spin, and I was like, what? And I also was trying to kind of beat that cousin into yo-yoing as well. So it was a very similar kind of story. So it's interesting that I always thought I was a bit primitive starting off with the brain in 2009, but it's good to know that you kind of started there as well.
You know, I mean, it's funny with the brain specifically, because that yo-yo to this day, like, people kind of have this weird obsession around it. And a lot of people still think it's like a great yo-yo to learn on. And so I think a lot of people still start on it. You know, despite it kind of, you know, yo-yo that automatically snaps back to you, that's imperial shape, you know, it's not really in the same line as where we go with modern yo-yos, and people so quickly outgrow that yo-yo today. But yeah, people do still start with them. But, you know, there's something kind of magical about the idea of, you know, technology in yo-yo, and that it's got this clutch and a brain that automatically comes back to you. So, you know, as long as people get into yo-yo and stick with it, that's all that matters in the long run. So if that's exactly how it happens, it's okay.
Yeah. So, I actually don't know a lot about your competitive career, but how did you, after, you know, you're at A to Z, you're going to all the yo-yo lessons. When did you start to get competitive? When did you start to be like, okay, this is fun?
Yeah. So, you know, the way A to Z worked is, at the time, Yomega had a whole like kind of program. You know, it was Team Omega, and they had the levels. And so the concept was the stores that ran classes, which were very far and few between. I'm not sure if there were many stores doing it. Maybe like Bird in Hand and Chico, where the National Yo-Yo Contest happens, and A to Z. I know there was a couple others randomly throughout the country. But there wasn't many. The whole idea was this is a program that should be run across the country. Right. But anyways, so you would go through the levels, and then eventually join like Team Omega and be connected with other people. And within the store we had a demonstration team. So you'd pass through all the levels and join the demonstration team, which we still do to this day there.
Wow.
And
sorry. And how did you get, like, was it like a sports ladder kind of thing? You had to learn a specific amount of tricks before you were a graduated professional?
Exactly. So we still do it to this day. I mean, the list looks completely different now, especially with, you know, unresponsive, because at the time, you know, early 2000s, like, we still were playing with yo-yos that came back to our hands. Like the bind wasn't really invented yet. So the hardest trick on the list, the last trick you had to pass before you were on Team Omega, was two-handed loops. So as you can imagine, took some people a very long time. The other two tricks that were on there that, again, killed people, was shoot the moon and vertical loops, you know, like looping tricks.
Yeah. Wow.
It's so hard. And there's one trick too. So on level 2, the last trick on the list was called dog around the block. And if you look it up, it's basically you have to throw like a UFO, and the yo-yo spinning sideways kind of, and it hits the string, and it's basically like sideways walk the dog, and it has to hit 3 bases. So it's like 1 to your right, 1 down the middle, and 1 all the way to your left. And then you have to shoot it and loop out and catch. Oh, wow. And it was hard to control it without it snapping back in the middle of the trick. And keep the spin time and everything like that. So like, yeah, it was a very different world for yo-yo tricks and everything like
it's
that.
It's almost like a different set of skills. Like, I can't imagine even doing any of that. So yeah. Totally.
Yeah. I mean, and so you know, that's how it works basically. And we still do this to this day. We just have completely different lists that we've kind of like remastered into. I actually just relaunched it in January with a whole new list of tricks and stuff as we're kind of getting ready to rebuild it. And I'll probably be reusing this on Yo-Yo Expert in terms of a trick program that I can try and help places, you know, run wherever they need that kind of thing, especially at clubs or whatever. But yeah, so basically the idea is, you know, you teach on this trick list, which is a really, ideally each trick kind of builds off each other or gives you elements that help you on the next level. And at the end of the classes, we do a test session. And so everybody gets, 2 tries per trick. And if you get the trick, it gets checked off your trick list. And as you advance the levels, you advance through and eventually can join our demonstration team and stuff like that.
Like yo-yo exams.
Yeah. Well, it kind of keeps it fun, keeps it exciting, keeps you progressing and trying to work towards that next trick. It's really important. So, I followed through that, kind of program. I eventually made it through Shoot the Moon and vertical loops and loops. And joined the team. And at the time, it was kind of cool. We had a really amazing group of players on the East Coast here in Massachusetts. Some of the names are Jordan Cooper, Nate Sutter, Alex Laziniak. If you look up those guys, they were pretty phenomenal and had a pretty big impact actually on trick innovation at the time. Because between them and then the West Coast, so like Paul Escalar and when Gabe was running Sector Y, that was a really big site at the time. They were like putting out videos and stuff. So, there was just this insane amount of, again, they were just inventing tricks. So I was around when like Nate Sutter came up with plastic whip.
Wow.
And that was and I still remember one year they went, I can't remember who went to national yo-yo contest, but they came back with Slick 6 yellow string.
Oh my God.
And it was the first time, because I think prior to that, we must have been using cotton. I don't know. Slick 6 wasn't really a thing yet. It was kind of brand new.
And what year was this?
It's probably in early 2000s, still 2001, 2002, I think.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember. They had neon yellow Slick 6, and it was oh my God, what is this amazing stuff? It works so well, and it doesn't grab,
Yeah.
And then, in that same timeline, the bind came out. And it was a progression too. For me, there were two yo-yos specifically that kind of broke into this. It was the Renegade by Super Yo. I don't know if you're familiar with that yo.
Yeah, actually I am. It was beaten into me by the Australian veterans, but yeah. And
nice. Yeah. It was a really cool yo-yo because it's still to this day. The parts, the axle inside can actually you can swap it. So you can change the shape from Imperial to Butterfly. Oh, wow. Which there's not really a yo-yo in the market right now that does that still. But you could pop the axle out and spin it around so you could swap the two halves. It was a horrible looping yo-yo. It wasn't any good as an Imperial, but it was an amazing Butterfly yo-yo. And as the bearing broke in and it spun smoother, the starbursts would also melt. And so eventually there just wasn't much response left. And if you let the bearing start spinning that smooth, they wouldn't come back up very well. Yeah. And so those yo-yos were getting pretty close, but if you threw hard enough, they would still snap back. And you said
2 yo-yos? What was another yo-yo?
Right. So the next one after that was the original Duncan freehand.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, and that was a pretty big deal when that came out. And again, funny story about that too. We had a guy that was at our club that helped kind of figure out the design around that because he was modifying Duncan wheels. His name was Stan Zygo, and he was pretty good friends with Steve Brown at the time. So he had modified some Duncan bearing wheels. Oh, wow. Bearings inside them and had machined parts to make it all work and stuff like that. So they kind of based original freehand off that. Oh, wow. Off a skateboard wheel. Well, it was actually off the Duncan wheel, which is still a yo-yo that's out there. Okay. Yeah, if you look it up, it's it's a very plain fixed axle. It looks like a freehand, basically. It's very rounded shape, but it has hubcap kind of looking things on the side. Okay. And it was a horrible yo-yo because it just had a metal axle, so it barely spun when you threw it down. It wouldn't come back well. But you could modify it, throw a bearing in it, and then you could make a pretty decent yo-yo. But you'd have to do some heavy duty work. So anyways, when that yo-yo came out, that was the introduction of the friction sticker. Oh, wow. And that was a pretty big deal because before friction stickers, it was still just starburst response. And so it's just raised plastic. So the friction sticker, was a rubber coated sticker that you stuck into the yo-yo. And what would happen is, when you got that yo-yo with 2 stickers inside of it, it was pretty responsive and people would use it like that. But they quickly found out you could just take one sticker out and use it with one sticker on one side. And as the rubber wore off on that sticker, it would become less and less responsive. And then eventually the rubber would be completely gone. The bearing would start spinning smooth. And again, you'd get this yo-yo that just wouldn't quite come back to your hand. And those two yo-yos, at least around our time, really started like kind of pulling the need for the bind. You just kind of figured out like, okay, like here it goes. Like, I guess I need to get it back somehow and I can kind of use the string.
Do you have any idea who invented the bind, or was it an intuitive thing?
Well, I mean, if you really want to say who invented the bind, I've had this conversation a lot with some other people. I think John Gates claims to have invented it to a certain extent. Offstring, I don't know if you know John Gates, but Austrian guy. Because he had a very long time ago, I guess, actually, Duncan demonstrators a very long time ago would do a trick where they would throw the yo-yo off string and catch it on the string spinning. It was just a catch. Yeah. And in order to get it back to your hand, the only way to get a yo-yo that's not connected to the string back to your hand would be to do a bind. To bind it. So, you know, it was kind of more of like a little party trick style thing that they would do. And so you could say the bind was possibly invented a very long time ago. And I know John was pretty good with this kind of thing even further back than that. And off string was out by that time too. So in a certain extent, you know, off string also kind of pulled that in. Right. Because like they were already doing what you would consider a bind to a certain extent. So it's really difficult to say because it was very natural progression evolution. I still remember the yo-yo that taught me how to bind was the Yo-Yo Jam Night Moves. That yo-yo had a large bearing. That and the Patriot by Yo-Yo Jam. Those two yo-yos were the first two yo-yos to use what is now the standard size C bearing. Gosh,
that must have been a revelation to have like these small bearings and then to be like, wow, we're gonna like up the size, and it's like this perfect.
Yeah, I can still so vividly remember these yo-yos coming in. I still remember where I was standing. We opened the box early in the back of the store in the warehouse we were in, and we looked at them. We were like, I didn't even know they were coming in. I hadn't heard anything about them because the internet was still fairly new. And you just like looked at it and it was like, whoa, what are these? And the Night Moves in particular was just this stunning yo-yo because it was, you know, clear polycarbonate, really large wind body with stainless steel rims. And it just the way it caught the light and everything, it was just like, man, this looks cool. And then you throw it down and it's got this huge gap, you know, and the bearing's big, and you're just like, wow, like what is this? Like, this is kind of like a very different thing. Right. And so, yeah, you're right. I mean, with the large bearing, you know, your first thought is kind of like, is this really necessary? Yeah. Like, is this really going to make this any better? And then, you know, the more you play with it, that bearing starts breaking in, and that yo-yo would not come back up without a bind after a while. Yeah. So like, it was just a necessity because like, even with the freehand and the Renegade, I felt like I could throw hard enough and pull back straight enough that it would catch, but the Night Moves, it just wasn't going to come back. So for me, that really kind of, you know,
and what
made that a thing.
I'm not 100% familiar with the original Night Moves. What response system did it have?
So that was still Starburst. Okay. The first Yo-Yo Jam yo-yo that introduced the O-ring was called the Matrix, and that was much further down the road, actually. Yeah, it was quite a ways down because I think I still remember when he showed up with the Matrix because we went to the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. for a demonstration. And Smithsonian Science Museum that's down there, and he showed up with the O-ring and the Matrix, and it was like going to be this breakthrough in yo-yo design to him. You know, like he thought this would change everything, and it did to a certain extent. It definitely led to silicone.
Yeah, and wow.
So, but that would have been in 2002, I think, end of 2002, possibly. So.
Okay. Yeah, and so all this new tech is coming out. And when do competitions like we know it today more or less kind of evolve?
Yeah. So for me, like I started going to contests, I guess in 2001 or so. We had a couple decent events around our area put on by a few different people. There was a guy that went to a tech school by us that ran. It was called WPI. It was actually a pretty big event at the time. And, it was kind of freestyle play. It was still pretty new. A sports ladder was still a pretty big thing, took up a decent amount of the competition, but people were doing freestyles. And, I totally jumped into that and kind of practiced the freestyle and stuff. But yeah, it was a completely different thing than it is today even. But, at its core, I guess it still is the same in the sense that, you're clicking, you're doing as many tricks as you can possible. But there was,
this is probably such a primitive question from like a new school kid, but how did the scoring system work back then? Were you still like, how did you click for an element? Like, did it?
Yeah, it's not too far off. We've, in the past 10 years, thanks largely to the work in Japan, they've really created a system that still at its core clicks tricks based on perceived difficulty. And that was basically what it was. It was just the click part. Right. So ideally, you would get a trick for each element and each transition, and then overall, how hard is the trick? But it was very much judge based. Each judge would judge completely differently. And each judge was very opinionated. I can still remember actually Jordan Cooper. If you look him up, amazing, so far ahead of his time. All three of these guys that were yo-yoing on the team at the time out here were so far ahead of their time. But Jordan in particular can still do tricks nobody does. And he would do very, very complicated technical, like almost ladder-esque, but like really insane mounts where it looks like he's tying a knot and then he'd get out of it. And it was, back at a time when people were doing double or nothing and like Iron Whip had just come out and Suicide was new. So for him to be doing these crazy technical mounts, like nobody could really touch that. And I still remember like one of the judges was pretty harsh with him, and like he didn't score very well, and the judge was just like, I couldn't really tell what you were doing. and it didn't really look like what you were doing was that hard. It just looked like a bunch of knots and then you got out of it. And so if you were a yo-yo player, you'd look at those tricks and go, oh my God, like how was he doing that? And how many hours he spent practicing that. But then you'd get a judge who just couldn't even grasp it. And so he didn't score well. And, we still, to this day, you could
it's
say. It's
funny. It's like more or less, that's still a problem, right? Yeah.
Sure. Sure. I think less so. I think we've gotten a little more strict about who is judging and ideally how they look at tricks, especially in Japan. Put a lot of effort into people being able to understand what is difficult, what isn't. And also, you don't get points for repeating elements. So that was a big thing. Obviously, people would kind of do the same trick. Yeah. They've kind of, as things crept up and became problems, we've always corrected the judging system and tried to fix the thing that allowed someone to win in kind of a cheap way or whatever people would feel like. And so we get the system we have now, which is, very specific clicking to compose a certain amount of tech score. And then everything else is broken into evaluation scores that are either technical difficulty or performance and all different categories within that. So, but back then, performance just wasn't really a thing. You would say like you click performance. So if you hit something to the beat, you get more points. And if you really hit to the beat, you'd probably get double points. But nobody was doing routines back then that like were, when you watch Evan DeGao today, it's just like unreal. Like the story he tells with that song from beginning to end and the way he's hitting the music, like nobody was really quite doing that. I still remember the first freestyle I feel like that really, really hit to the music with such an impact was there was a year that Paul Hahn probably should have won Worlds, but I think he got second. It was to a song. I think it's called Rockstar.
That was 2006, right?
That sounds about right. But man, he hit to the music that year so well. And I still remember like when he did that, it was one of the first times I saw somebody connect to a song in such a dynamic way. And then it just continued to progress from there. I mean, John Ando, when he won Worlds and really changed everything, that was another good example of somebody who understood how to connect to a song for impact, you know. And there's been lots of others, and I'm sure there was others before theirs, but those two really stick out in my head. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, I mean, so anyways, like long story short and all that too, I started competing, you know, back in around 2001, I guess. And for me, I was always a teacher first. You know, the most important thing when I first got onto the yo-yo team was actually like, can I work at the store and do this as a job and teach people how to yo-yo? So for me, it was always much more of a focus on that. I enjoyed competing. I really enjoyed creating a routine, especially the music that I liked and kind of getting up on stage. It was like, I hadn't really been big into sports in high school or anything. So it was definitely like an outlet for being, you know, kind of like my art. Yeah. So I definitely enjoyed competing on that level. But I wasn't so focused on always winning. So like my energy really went into teaching. I put a lot of effort into like figuring out the best way to teach whatever trick it was that we were teaching at yo-yo school. Yeah. And like I still remember I would focus on even like trying to do it with my left hand and teach someone a trick from being left-handed, because it's much easier if they're right-handed to learn from left-handed in person, because they can just do exactly what you're doing. So I would teach Eiffel Tower backwards. And stuff like that, so that they could learn faster and stuff like that. So my energy was always kind of spent there. And eventually, I mean, I did definitely, you know, got pretty big into competing. I would always get really stressed out at Worlds because we used to have compulsories. So it was before, you know, they didn't have, if you don't know what compulsories are, it was, yeah, you know, you had this list of 10 tricks, and in order to be able to freestyle, you had to do the 10 tricks, and you got 5 points for your first try, 3 points for your second try, something like that. And if you didn't hit it, you know, you didn't get the points or whatever. And I would always get so stressed out trying to pull that off, and never make it to World's Freestyle, because I just like got so in my head on that. But I also didn't really give it that many years before I was like working with Yo-Yo Jam and stuff. But I did compete. I won the Massachusetts State Contest we had here a couple of years in a row, and I won the Northeast Regional Contest. Then I went to the National Yo-Yo Contest and got 5th.
Oh, wow. And are these videos online?
You know, I'm not sure if 5th place is, I haven't been able to find that video. So if somebody has that video and can find it, feel free to send it over to me. Yeah. It's been a long time since I've seen it. I used to have it like because at the time, you know, we would download this stuff to hard drives. Like there was no YouTube or anything. So the videos are floating out there on somebody's drive somewhere. I'm sure. I think like, man, I want to say like Shane Karen uploaded them that year or something like that. I remember like, it was just like, you kind of got lucky. Somebody filmed, had enough bandwidth to put it on their server to send out all the files. At the time too, it was expensive to share files through the internet that were that big. Especially freestyle videos that are 3 minutes long, you know? I mean, at the time too, when I first started, I was on dial-up internet, and it would take, I still remember I would go to bed, I would start downloading a video, and I would wake up the next morning so excited to watch the video. And then I would find out that like 20 seconds into the video, like, you know, I lost the connection to the internet, so I only had 20 seconds, but I was like, oh my God, I have 20 seconds of tricks that I haven't seen before to watch. And it was like so exciting.
Oh my gosh.
So, very different time in that sense.
I find it fascinating to hear about everything that you've done, because in the Australian yo-yoing scene, we're very far behind. So when you were mentioning compulsories, I have personally had to do compulsories to compete at Australian Nationals. So we were using compulsories
until recently, or to this day?
Up until 2011, which is quite recent. in
Okay.
like,
Yeah.
that's
In the
like,
big scheme of things.
yeah, I mean, yeah, sure. But yeah, so I was like, what is this? Like the rest of the world is doing these cool like 1 minute preliminary things. Like I want to do that. But then I go to ANYC and it's like, can you do throw hand grind? And the one that would destroy everyone is like trying to land 5 suicides in a row. Like I don't know if that's like ever been done in the history of Australia, but
that sounds rough.
yeah, no. And yeah, it was just, yeah, it's crazy to think that, you know, it's all a part of history, right?
Totally,
and something else that was actually pretty funny, I guess, is that I don't know if you know this, but I've only ever seen one of your freestyle videos. I think it would have been NER, and it's the one where like you're yoing to like Moonlight Shadow. It's like it's kind of like a trance song, and I cut up a video of kind of comparing your freestyle to Hiroyuki Suzuki's 2008 freestyle, and I titled the video
actually I've had a lot of people comment on that video to me.
And that was my first like video that ever got a bit of traction, so that was edited by me.
You can thank me for all your fame.
Basically, practically, yeah. But no, it was just, I found it crazy that like it was, you know, you competed at such a level, and this was in 2004, and we're comparing him to 2008, and it was a very weird video, but I think it was my very first idea of like, oh wow, people actually watch yo-yo videos. You said that you were very teacher first. What prompted that? Why did you have such a passion for teaching?
So, you know, at the classes, I would go in, and it just kind of, I don't know, it just drew me. I thought it was a really cool idea to be able to have a job that was teaching yo-yo. Like, you know, at the time I was 16, so I could get my license and drive here. And so that was like a really exciting, you know, thought. I grew up quite in the middle of nowhere, like out in the woods, not very close to anything. You know, it took like a 20 minute to 40 minute drive to get anywhere good. I actually lived about 45 minutes away from the toy store. So it wasn't like a quick, like, okay, I'll just go to work. Like it was kind of a big deal. But at the time, like it was just kind of what I wanted to do. Like I was really excited about the thought of having a job and having something to do that wasn't school. And so I just kind of like jumped into it. And so like, you know, whenever I tend to really, whatever I do, I try to do a good job, you know, whatever it is in life. And so, you know, my job was to teach yo-yo, as well as like sell toys and stuff like that. And so I just kind of took it seriously. Like, this is what I do. And my job is to really get kids into yo-yo. And I think I've always just gotten more out. Like the more I taught, the more I would make connections with kids and people and families. And that just, you know, really propelled me forward. You know, when you teach somebody a trick and they get it and they're excited to show so-and-so who else they're with that trick they just learned, I get so much out of that. It just feels so good that it makes you want to just teach everybody more tricks. And I can see the impact it has on kids too, just in the long run. We had people that would show up to yo-yo school who would be like, you know, super introverted, could barely make eye contact with you. And, you know, 2 weeks later, they're in there, you know, doing, you know, trapeze or double or nothing. And they're smiling and they're talking and they're outgoing and they have this skill that they can show their friends and people. And it gives them this incredible confidence boost. And I think that just continued to build on it for me, where it's like, man, this is such a good thing. So, you know, it just continued to reinforce the fact that this is what I want to do. I love teaching yo-yo. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of, that's just what drew me. Like for me, it was always about teaching people yo-yo first. And I still obviously practice for my own good. Like I still love to learn tricks to this day. I mean, just learned a sweet trick on Instagram the other day that I've been doing nonstop for the past couple of days. I don't have as much like free time just to throw between like having the different businesses and 2 kids. But like I still fit it in. I still learn, and it still feels just as good to learn a new trick. You know, I mean, it really does. Like to this day, you learn a new trick. It just like, yes, like it just hits those parts of your brain that are like the best thing ever. So
that dopamine surge.
Yeah, totally.
When did you, and I guess we've kind of like muddled up the timeline a bit, but when did you become the Yo-Yo Jam team captain? When did that, or when did you officially get on Team Yo-Yo Jam?
So that's a good story too. So the way Yo-Yo Jam worked at the time, they had team members spread throughout the country. And their idea was that they wanted to have somebody in each region of the country. And I think the idea was that they would represent them at contests, and they would try and encourage them to visit stores or whatever and get their yo-yos in stores or whatever. And so the person who was the Northeast captain, I think it was, or whatever, was Matt. His name is totally escaping me. He had a signature yo-yo called the Wicked Factor.
Okay.
I'll have to look up his name. Oh my God, I can't remember. Yeah. He was actually he was in a McDonald's commercial.
Oh gosh. Okay.
Yeah, he was, and he was known for being really fast on a yo-yo or whatever. But anyways, at the time he got his signature yo-yo, the Wicked Factor, which was just a David Capurro Cappy Factor. Not that any of these yo-yos mean anything to anybody today, but at the time they were like a really big deal. Yeah. The Cappy Factor was like a really big deal. Everybody was throwing a Cappy Factor at the time. It was a hot pink, like a really neon hot pink with silver rims, and had these like cool yellow black caps on the side. It was just a really neat yo-yo. I'm totally going on a tangent.
Yeah, no, I totally need to get like a picture of these yo-yos so I can understand what you guys.
Yeah, you should Google it. Cappy Factor, David Capurro. Because David Capurro is also like a pretty big influence. He was a big part of the West Coast scene. He helped start Spin Docks out there and like kind of get that whole like scene flowing. Like he would help organize the meetups and stuff like that. So he was a pretty well-known person out there. I mean, he was so known. He flew out as like a yo-yo celebrity to the East Coast.
Wow.
To judge and whatever. So yeah, anyways, Cappy Factor. Then they gave this kid Matt that same yo-yo, but they made it like this ice blue color called the Wicked Factor. Because out here in Massachusetts, wicked is a yo-yo wicked is a word that we throw out. So I think he thought wicked was a cool name for a yo-yo. So anyways, he got his yo-yo and then immediately quit. Because I guess that's all he cared about was getting the signature yo-yo. I think he had previously been on Team Omega, because that's when he was on the McDonald's commercial.
Right.
But then he got the yo-yo and then he quit, and then he kind of just disappeared. Well, Matt Rose. I'm sorry. I think that was his name, Matt Rose. Anyways, so he disappeared. And so they didn't have anybody in the Northeast. And the way you got on the team at the time anyways, was you actually submitted a video to the overall team captain, I think, which I'm pretty sure was Rick Wyatt at the time.
Sorry, when you mean video, do you mean like, because of feeble-minded, did you upload something to YouTube or?
Right. So you know, we're going back in time. So VHS tapes ruled the world at this time still.
So you were mailing like
damn straight. You're mailing a VHS tape in the mail. That's what you do. There was no uploading videos to anything. You know, like it didn't exist. You know, I mean, you could put videos on the internet, but it still wasn't how normal people would share videos. Like nobody was smart enough to do that yet.
Right.
Like there were tech people that understood how to take a video and code it. Because you had to encode them. Because it wasn't like you just had a video file, and like people didn't have software to open those video files. And you know, I mean, I know iPhones. No one was using Mac computers or anything. It was all Windows machines and all very archaic. So, anyways, yeah. So filmed it all on a VHS. And, you know, threw it in the mail, filmed a little video showcasing what I could do on a classic Spin Factor 2 yo-yo, which if you look up that yo-yo too, it's so narrow and it's rounded. But I was really good on narrow yo-yos. I always used narrow yo-yos back then.
Okay.
Anyways, so, I feel like they may have had a list of tricks you had to do. And then you had to do like a freestyle or something like that. And my skill at the time was not amazing, but it was probably good enough. And I emphasized the fact that I was really into teaching at the store, because I had just started working at the store. And I think they saw that and that kind of piqued their interest. So, they sent me a letter inviting me to join the team, said they would send me some yo-yos and stuff like that. And I was really excited. And at the time, I think it must have been 2002, because that was my first year I went to the World Yo-Yo Contest in Orlando at the time. And I still remember they're like, yeah, we'll send you yo-yos and da-da-da. And then like didn't hear a single thing from them. And I decided like go to Worlds anyways. And so I took a trip to Worlds and still haven't gotten any yo-yo. So the sponsorship itself wasn't really anything too grand, because I'm pretty sure, I think I may have gotten a yo-yo at Worlds. I can't really remember. But I was way too shy to like say anything. I did get a team shirt. Yo-Yo Jam's colors were purple, and this awful teal color at the time, which is kind of funny because those colors are really in right now.
Yeah.
But at the time, they were not. And we had these horribly ugly bowling shirts. Everyone had bowling shirts because bowling shirts were apparently what everyone thought was really cool to yo-yo in. I don't know. When you're on a team, you got a bowling shirt. So we had these purple with black stripes and hot pink trim Yo-Yo Jam shirts. I'm sure I still have mine somewhere. I'm sure someone else does too. I used to be in the team back then. They were like, wow, like pretty atrocious, but it was still like pretty damn cool at the time, like here's our shirts. And it just kind of progressed from there. I worked really well demonstrating, teaching. So they gave me a couple cool opportunities to, again, the Smithsonian. We went to the Smithsonian and we did these demonstrations for these invention days they had. So they would talk about like how things were invented, and it was like very science focused. And so the yo-yo was like one of the most, earliest inventions of a toy. So we kind of focused on that and taught people all about the modern yo-yo and the invention of ball bearings and stuff. So I got a lot of really cool experiences out of that, and just kind of continued to prove to them that like I had a really good, kind of demonstration-esque thing. And at the time, I guess so kind of progressing, I was getting ready to go to college. I was always really close to the members on the team and connecting with them. And eventually, Rick Wyatt decided that he was not going to run the team anymore, because it was a lot of communication, a lot of work, and it was just good timing for me because I was in college. It was my second year in college. I think like AOL Instant Messenger was how everyone talked to each other at the time, and email,
Yeah.
And I was really always tech savvy by that point. Because growing up in the middle of the woods and nowhere, I never had internet. And so once I got to college and had high speed internet, it was like, oh my God. So I would just like go all in on tech. And so I was able to really communicate with people fast and efficiently, and always been like a really fast touch typist, and just find the easiest, most efficient way to do whatever it is I need to do kind of thing. So I was really, really good at connecting with people. So I started like running their team, because I was able to take players and talk to them and find out what their needs were. Because at the time, Yo-Yo Jam was having a hard time keeping players on the team happy. And it was all just communication issues. What do you want as a player? What do you need? What's important? What kind of contest do you want to get to? How much do you need in terms of money? Here's what the team can do, kind of thing. And so I just kind of took it on in full force and got really into that. And they were all my friends anyways. And so it was really important to me on a personal level to take care of these people. And so it just turned into a job from there. And, I was still working at the toy store at this time too. So I would go to work and kids are coming in with their yo-yos broken, and I'm constantly fixing them. So it was very natural for me to step into a customer service role for Yo-Yo Jam too. So like they had me answering their customer service emails. And at the time, it was all about monitoring the forums. There were three or four main forums at the time. Yoyoing.com and Dave's Skill Toys and the and eventually Yoyo Nation. But it was all about kind of trying to help people with their problems with their yo-yos. And Yo-Yo Jam had a lot of problems at the time too, because they had issues with either cracking, the yo-yos themselves would crack internally, or they might vibrate, or quality control isn't perfect, or the bearings or whatever else it is, people wouldn't put something on right. And so my job was to try and help people with all of that. And so it just kind of continued to turn into a job, because I understood. I had kids coming into the store in person with the broken stuff. So I saw it in person. I was able to react to that. And so when someone emailed me about a problem, even without context, I generally knew what was going on just because of all the experience in person. So
yeah, it
just kind of progressed from there.
It's crazy how much yo-yoing is a part of your life. I don't think there's anyone who is more exposed to yo-yoing than you were. But a question I have been dying to ask you is, what is the story with the dark magic? How did that happen? Because I remember, and I'm sure a lot of people who were taught by you remember their first dark magic, and it's this angelic high-tech thing that everyone needed and loved. And how did that kind of come out from this whole Yo-Yo Jam experience?
So the dark magic was 2003, I believe. Maybe 2004, actually. It might have been 2004. Yeah. It's been a while. And so at the time I had already been running their team for a little while. And I was always excited about the idea of a signature model, especially since I'm at the store teaching kids constantly. I always thought it would be cool to teach on something that, I had designed. And I had always had some pretty strong ideas about what I wanted in a yo-yo, because I always gravitated towards very specific models, and they were generally a little bit wider, a little bit heavier. And so eventually Yo-Yo Jam was at a point where they were like, okay, let's make a yo-yo. Because I had definitely proven I had the ability to sell Yo-Yo Jam yo-yos at the store. We were selling a lot of Yo-Yo Jam yo-yos, because everyone would buy it to start on, and their first, second, third, fourth yo-yos were probably all Yo-Yo Jam yo-yos at the time.
That was me as well. That was yeah. Anyway, continue.
Yeah. It was a big thing. So I sketched out what I wanted, and the key components of it was very nice flat rim on the side, kind of arched up. And then I had figured out, I was always really good at snap starts. That's kind of where the flat rim comes from.
Yeah.
Because it was very important for me to be able to snap start the yo-yo really fast, especially for freestyle. But I also thought it always looked really cool to snap start a yo-yo and go into a trick. So there was that part of it. And then the thumb grinds, I had kind of figured out how to, or a lot of people call them inner ring grinds. But to balance and catch the yo-yo on your thumb. That was a big thing at the time.
Iconic.
I kind of figured out how to do it originally on a speeder from Yo-Yo Jam, which was Hiroyuki Suzuki's signature yo-yo at the time.
Oh, wow. So did the speeder come out first?
So the speeder, it did get released first before the Dark Magic, I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
Or at least right around the same time. So I'm pretty sure that's when I kind of had figured out how to do it and drew the sketch out anyways, to try and create more of a little flat rim area so I could catch it. Because I had the idea. I couldn't actually do it very well when I drew out the sketch. I do remember when I got the speeder, whether or not that was before or after, I remember being oh, I can hit this really well on this now. So the dark magic at the same time kind of came out, and like that was a focus. And it was kind of funny because by trying to create that weird rim to catch it, something weird happened with the weight. Because the way Yo-Yo Jam had to do that, the yo-yo was pretty wide already, and it was already pretty heavy. So they had to cut weight somewhere, but I had wanted this flat inner rim to catch it. So where they cut the weight was from the very top right part of the rim. If you looked at a cross section, so right under the flat part, they kind of cut up and in and out. And what it did is it did this very interesting weight distribution, where there's a lot of center weight, but then there was also a lot of rim weight. And there weren't many yo-yos, especially at the time, that had a weight distribution where there were two focused points like that. Most were either all or nothing. You either went all rim weight, or it was like a plastic yo-yo and it was more evenly distributed. But it was always about rim weight, wind rate, longest spin times. And the dark magic was a little bit more well balanced in that end. And so, yeah, I mean, it came out, and for me, it was just perfect. I really, it did the few things I really wanted to do so well. And I very much enjoyed it. And I was really lucky because a lot of key people, just really grew to love how it played. And that include, like Paul Hahn and Yuki Spencer.
Oh, wow.
Won nationals with it. Augie Fash won nationals with it. And Shane Caron, funny enough, won off string and freehand with it at the National Yo-Yo Contest.
Gosh, okay.
With the dark magic.
Wow.
This is all the original dark magic. Yeah. So
man,
it had a lot of success in a lot of different realms in that sense. And when we first released it too, at the time, we had kind of like a mini yo-yo boom at our local kind of club. We had a couple schools that all got into yo-yo at the same time. And we were teaching yo-yo classes. We would have like 20 or 30 kids. And I was really at my prime for teaching too. I was just so into it. And so when the yo-yo came out, we had our regional contest. And I think we had almost 100 and something people compete. It was unbelievable. And I still remember we sold through like 100 dark magics in person.
Oh gosh.
Which again, at the time, it just was a big deal.
Because it was an expensive yo-yo for the time, right? Like I remember
totally.
$40. I mean, today it's not that crazy. Like that's seen as affordable, but like factoring inflation, I remember I was like, wow, this is the Ferrari of yo-yos when I first got it.
Totally. There were a few at the time that were kind of in that ballpark. Like H-Spin had started making yo-yos that were all metal, that were kind of edging on the $100, but they weren't making that many of them. So this was definitely there. I mean, the yo-yo that came before dark magic, that was it. That had a very similar impact was the Hitman, which was Johnny. Yep, Johnny Devalier's yo-yo. Because when that released, it was a very similar thing. And it released at Worlds, and Johnny had done everything right too in a similar sense. We always followed a similar path, me and him. And I got to give him credit too, because he also inspired me in many ways in terms of how to present a yo-yo and stuff like that. He always kind of got he had a very good sense in terms of how to market something. We always tended to take opposite directions and angles on our marketing approaches. He's kind of always been the yin to my yang in that sense. But we balanced each other really well, and we had a lot of similar experiences in respect to that too. And in some ways too, we kind of pushed each other on those too. So the Hitman came out, and I definitely learned a few things in terms of like how he introduced that model, made a video, championed it. And so I kind of took a similar approach, but my approach was introduce a video, get people excited about like the thumb grinds and stuff like that, and start making tutorials. Because again, my focus was always on teaching at the store. Yeah. And so I wanted to show people that this was a really good yo-yo to learn on, because at the time, Yo-Yo Jam yo-yo still became responsive out of the box. and you would make them unresponsive if you wanted. Because to me at the time, I was still playing semi-responsive. Like I could do a bind, but it wasn't necessary. And since I was teaching most of the time, I would still do flyaway dismounts, and that's just kind of how I played. You know, it didn't need a bind.
Yeah.
Johnny was actually one of the first people to really push like the kind of unresponsive play that you think of today, where like no matter what you do, it won't come back. He would use concave bearings. He very much helped popularize the original concave bearing. Because he would put shims to widen the gap on the Hitman, throw the concave bearing in there, and that yo-yo was not coming back unless you knew how to really bind. So, you know, at the time that was one way to play, and I still kind of did semi-responsive play. So for me, Dark Magic was just a really good way to show people, you know, you can play in responsive and really good, but you can learn really fast on this. It has all these elements, and if you do continue to practice and get really good, you can also learn all these other tricks that you can see in the video. So that was kind of my approach, was to try and, you know, show people you can do a little bit of everything. So I at the time I had a website that is funny enough still online, mastermagic.
Yep.
Yeah. So that was always, I was big into, at the time I was always big into magic, like art of illusion, card tricks, stuff like that. Like it always been something I was really into. And so I was, you know, especially magic tricks follow a really similar thing with yo-yo to me, in that it's about, you know, showcasing what you do, and there aren't like secret tricks so much. But it still is about, you can make a trick look really different depending on how you do it. And that's like how magic works to a certain extent. It's all about the performance. It's all about the flair. It's all about the timing. It's all about the pattern and stuff like that. And so with yo-yo tricks, you can make something look really good if you put the time and energy into it. So again, that was kind of always an angle for me. Yeah. And so it bled into that really well. So I just kind of stuck with the whole magic thing. I mean, I've still dabbled in magic tricks a little bit. I just still enjoy doing it off and on. But you know, yo-yo took over, and that's where that all was. So anyways, elaborating on a little bit, but you know, had the whole website, had trick tutorials on the Dark Magic, and it just continued to kind of take off. People really learned from that and would reach out to me and let me know that, you know, that they really enjoyed learning and ask.
Yeah, I have like so many questions off the back of like everything you just said. I think one thing, going back to Johnny DeValley, I remember there was this video you guys uploaded, and it was, I think it was like the Yo-Yo Jam training video.
Yep.
And yeah, just when you were saying that like he was the yin to your yang, I remember looking at that video, and you see these two guys that are like the powerhouses of yo-yoing as certainly as I knew it. And then you have like this very relaxed, slack, technical kind of style, whereas Johnny DeValley is like crunching through these intricate like herky-jerky mounts. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, there are two ways you can go about this.
Yep.
And something else that you were saying before actually was, you know, John had a very interesting setup for the Hitman. You know, he'd put in concave bearings and put in shims. And this is something I've actually wanted to ask you for a really long time and it's funny, as I was doing a bit of research for this, I looked on the forums, and there was a guy that was like, what does Andre Boulay's Dark Magic setup actually look like? And then one of the guys trolled him, and he said, he puts a drop of unicorn blood in the bearing, coats the metal with plutonium, and sets up his caps with magic. So I just really wanted to come and take the time and be like, what was your setup for the Dark Magic? Was it stock?
No, so
was there unicorn blood?
It's interesting. It's a good question. So, I mean, there were two iterations of Dark Magic. There was the first one and the second one. And so the first one was hybrid response, meaning that, you know, one side was a starburst and one side had just a standard O-ring. And so the way I would use that, and Yo-Yo Jam yo-yos at the time were all adjustable gap. Which meant that the tighter the gap was, the more responsive it was, and the looser, the less responsive, obviously. So
I kind of missed that, to be honest. I really liked having a bit of play in how responsive a yo-yo is.
Totally. I took a huge amount of advantage out of that because when I was teaching, I could just turn my yo-yo and basically make it responsive or unresponsive on a whim, especially with a stock bearing, standard flat bearing. And so, you know, it was definitely like the way for me, the way to go was flat bearing, which is so silly. But for a very long time, flat bearing. And over time, as everyone else around me started playing more and more unresponsive, and, you know, as tricks came out where, for example, like Brent Stoll, stuff like that, you know, that trick takes a very unresponsive yo-yo because there's a jerky motion. You can still do it with a responsive yo-yo, but you have to be very smooth. And so as I learned more of those tricks, it became more important that my yo-yo was unresponsive. So I did end up using a concave bearing quite often, but I would not use shims because shims would make the gap way too wide for me. So my trick was with the original Dark Magic was a concave bearing with a completely tight gap, because the concave bearing would make the string centered so I could still keep it, you know, spinning for a really long time, but it would still come back to my hand like almost effortlessly. And it was kind of for me the best of both worlds. It would spin a really long time, be really smooth, but still snap back just the way I liked it.
Did you use a ceramic bearing or did you use a stainless steel one? What concave bearing did you like? I'm sure it was Diffio, but what kind?
I wasn't picky there. You know, I didn't. I think with the ceramics, if I had a ceramic, I would use it. But I also. I mean, I've always been pretty non-picky in what I put in my yo-yos for the most part. I can always kind of throw on whatever somebody puts in my hand pretty well. So it was generally stainless steel. Ceramic and stainless steel are honestly really similar. Unless you're doing like Johnny would go with ceramic because he needed extra long spin time for extra long technical kind of spin or whatever. I was always much bigger into like fast regeneration, you know, kind of stuff. So just a standard stainless steel was good for me. But if I splurged on a ceramic, I definitely had ceramics for a while that I would use too. So.
Okay. That's super interesting. And when you were doing, I kind of want to dig into this properly a little bit later, but when you were doing the Expert Village tutorials, what was that setup? Was that just a stock bearing or was that,
So good question. I'd have to go back and look. I honestly can't remember what would have been set up in that. I feel like it was a concave bearing with a tight gap. I'm pretty confident if I went back and looked at the gap that was in there. It could have easily been a flat bearing too, but I have a faint memory at that point, at least, that that's what I would have been throwing. So.
Yeah, just the reason I'm asking that is because I remember as a beginner yo-yo player, I would like watch you do tutorials and like look at your yo-yo as it spun and spun and spun, and mine would die every like 10 seconds. And I'm like, he's cheating somehow. There is something in his yo-yo that makes it different to my dark magic. Yeah,
I mean, you know, it's kind of, I've always been lucky in that sense. I can take any yo-yo and kind of. Like it's funny. We currently at the yo-yo classes, we teach on the Spin Star from Yo-Yo Factory, which is a transaxle yo-yo plastic sleeve at the core. And I can do a lot of string tricks with that yo-yo, and I can throw a trapeze and keep it spinning on the string, you know, nearly as long as most of the other kids on a bearing yo-yo. And so they watch me and they're just like, how are you doing that? But you know, when you grow up learning on the yo-yos that we learned on, which one of my first bearing yo-yos was a Team Losi Cherry Bomb, which is a pretty high wall, narrow yo-yo. And if you wanted to be able to do trapeze or double or nothing or you know, Buddha's Revenge or anything that like moved the string, you had to throw so hard. And you had to keep that string so dead center in the gap of the yo-yo that was just how you kept it spinning. And so I just learned from the very beginning. And again, teaching kids how to throw yo-yos, I understood the importance of all those small little nuances where it's like, look, if you want to keep this spinning, you know, as long as you can, you need to keep the string so dead center and you really need to snap your wrist. And so for me, that's just kind of how I threw. the other thing I was really big into at the time, and again, Andre Boulay kind of introduced them initially and got everyone excited about, was grinds. Grinds were something everyone was really getting into. And in order to do a grind really well and effectively, you really have to throw. You really have to snap your wrist, get some power to it. And so from the beginning, like, I would practice grinds and I would really huck that thing. I would really throw. I got really good at really snapping, and I could do grinds longer than a lot of people could really do them at the time. And that just bleeds into when you're watching my yo-yo spinning in the tutorial, why it's spinning so long. It's because I'm throwing so hard because that's just how I threw. It's funny too. It unfortunately led into a bit of a injury for me, and was one of the reasons I stopped competing. Because I threw so hard and obviously was throwing so regularly at the time. I ended up getting tendonitis in my throw arm.
Oh, wow.
And
from throwing.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, from throwing. And I mean, it's hard when you get tendonitis. It's just overuse of a tendon. And it was in my elbow. So when I threw, and when it hit the snapping motion specifically, it would be this horrible pain as it snapped out. And I remember going to the doctor. They also kind of like tennis elbow. I guess like tennis players get it a lot too.
Yeah, I was about to say like.
Yeah. And so they're just like, yeah, I mean, not much you can do besides just stop throwing, And I was like, or just don't throw so hard too. And so that was really hard. But I still remember too, at the time, hub stacks had just kind of started coming out. Like, it was 2008 or so. Yeah, 2006, I guess, probably somewhere around there. And so I was, instead of like throwing, I would try and pull start, and you don't really get nearly as good of a throw off a pull start.
As much power,
so it just didn't work. So, it was one of the reasons I stopped competing, because in order to practice as much as I needed to practice, I would just screw up my arm, and then I couldn't even throw for weeks. Gosh. And I was still teaching at the store, and I had to teach because that was my job. So I really had to kind of like limit myself and try and balance it out. And so it just kind of turned to whiz. But anyways, long story short, I can throw very well, and I can, most yo-yos you put in my hand, I can do whatever trick can be done. I love a good challenge. Let's see if we can do whatever trick this is on this very difficult yo-yo to do it on.
Yeah, that's something, a skill that I think the new generation just kind of lacks. One question I really want to ask you about is the Yo-Yo Jam legacy. The legacy was my first yo-yo. And
neat.
It was literally like the first, and in a lot of ways it was actually the inspiration for the variant, a plastic yo-yo that I've kind of worked with as well. But I'm
a big fan of the variant.
But yeah, no, and I just remember like me like walking up to you in Tokyo with a marker and being like, "Can you sign my legacy?" was just this. Anyway, this crazy moment where it's like, this was my first yo-yo, this was the guy who designed it, and this is the guy who taught me. It was a very... Anyway, how did that yo-yo come to be?
So, the Dark Magic had a lot of success. And we, full plastic yo-yos were always something that once you got a really good yo-yo working, the idea of being able to put more yo-yos in more people's hands just gets more exciting, Yeah. And I've always been a big fan of plastic yo-yos in general. Like I loved Metal Rim, Dark Magic. That was definitely what I used to love to throw the most. But there's something that's so special about an all plastic yo-yo. And especially when it's full plastic body, because you don't have to worry about if you smash it into the ground. It's just kind of all around, and it's cheaper. So people can buy more.
Exactly.
And so people can own a couple different colors of them. They can sometimes be more collectible. They're more engaging. They're just more approachable. So it just kind of was always something that, especially back then. Again, Johnny had a had a version of the Hitman that was all plastic.
The Lin Fury,
Mickey,
right?
Yeah, the Lin Fury. Yeah. And Hiroyuki Suzuki, which was the speeder. He had a yo-yo called the Speed Maker that was all plastic.
Yeah. And I have all those yo-yos and still have them to this day.
Yeah. I mean, they're all great. I mean, so, you know, for me initially, I didn't actually want anything to do with anything that wasn't dark magic, because I was very happy teaching on dark magic. You know, too, like people were buying dark magic to learn on, and that to me was great. That worked, you know. And over time, eventually we hit a point where I was like, you know what, this is a natural progression, and it would be really fun to see what we could make. And so we took a different approach. And at the time, Yo-Yo Jam was trying to find like innovative ways to make plastic yo-yos that could play more like a metal rim yo-yo, but still be priced closer to plastic. And what they did was they found these washers that were pretty cheap. But, you know, so if you pull off the cap of what is the Legacy, which again, no longer in production.
Gosh, I'm so sad about that.
I know it's got this beefy metal washer under the cap that they pressed into the yo-yo. And remarkably, that yo-yo spun really true with this really not precision made washer. You know, these were stamped out of metal. They were
so they weren't even precise.
Oh, well, I mean, as precise as a washer needs to be, which is not precision yo-yos usually need. You know,
exactly.
I saw there was a flat side and a rounded side if you look at the washer, and it was really important that you put the rounded side down, face down, when you press them into. And I remember like they had a run where like somebody had pressed them in backwards, and so those were wobbling. And again, I mean, it wasn't. They were meant to go in between things that screwed together to prevent, you know, things getting stuck or, you know, whatever, like a washer does. Yeah. So. But yeah, no, they were not precision made. It just kind of, they worked. Yeah. And the yo-yo, you know, we made the yo-yo thin enough, I think, and maximized where we put the weight in the plastic that it worked. So.
And the yo-yo was amazing. It spun for a really long time, and it was really stable. And I couldn't. So by the time I got kind of good enough to kind of do my own freestyles, I had a big kind of collection of yo-yos. So I had like the 888, you know, I had a dark magic as well. Nice. I had, you know, yo-yos from all price ranges. And I also had, you know, the Lin Fury, the Speed Maker, Atmosphere, New Breed, all of it. But I couldn't comfortably use anything but the Legacy because there was this stability to it. So if you ever like look at my very first performance at like a talent show, I'm using this blue Legacy because it's the only yo-yo that's stable enough to kind of handle everything.
You'll have to put a link in the show notes.
in the show notes. And it's amazing. I didn't know that the washers were made so imprecisely. I'm like, oh, you know, they probably machined these like a rim or something and then pressed it in. I didn't know he's just chucking it in. So yeah, that's super insightful. Okay, so I guess we're kind of like running out of time, but I would love to talk to you about Expert Village and how, because I did a bit of digging, and the way I understand it right now is you were studying neuroscience at the time and were feeling pretty burned out, and could you just go through the whole story of Expert Village and how that births Yo-Yo Expert as we know it?
Good question. So I guess it was towards the end of college for me. I was still teaching it at the store quite a bit, doing yo-yos and stuff. And I was still working for Yo-Yo Jam. And, you know, yo-yoing had definitely taken a bit more of a turn into work, you know. I wasn't competing. I had stopped competing because of the tendonitis. And I was also running Yo-Yo Jam's team. So it did start feeling weird for me to compete against people that I was putting on a team. And Yo-Yo Jam at the time had the world's best competition team. We had all the world champions on our team. We were the team that anybody wanted to be part of, kind of thing. And so it was a lot of pressure to kind of keep that going. And so to me, it just felt like the professional thing to do was kind of remove myself from a competitor standpoint so I could focus on presenting the team properly and stuff. And so it just turned into a bit of a burnout to a certain extent. So I definitely was looking at yo-yoing more like work and less like this fun, playful thing or whatever. But it wasn't a bad thing. It just was what it was at the time. And yeah, I was in college. I was going to school for neuroscience. I was doing a bachelor's degree. It was psychology and biology. But in a neuroscience program that eventually led me into a master's program for a neuroscience track, which I did progress through and finish and stuff too. But the Expert Village thing came about. So Expert Village was a website that was focused on teaching people how to do things. Didn't matter what it was. It was slightly before YouTube. I think YouTube was probably a thing at the time, but it wasn't like the winner yet, it was just another platform out there for watching videos. And so Expert Village's goal was to create this database of anything and everything. And they were hoping to probably sell it to Google or whatever once they created it. So they were hiring anybody who was a videographer living in an area to find someone that could do a skill and teach it. Didn't matter what that skill was. So it could have been like how to blow dry your hair like this, or how to juggle, or, how to yo-yo. And I think they reached out to John Higbee first. It was a group of people that lived out in our area. It was about an hour drive from where I am in Montague, out here in Massachusetts. And I think they reached out to John first, and he was like, well, I don't usually teach. But I know there's this guy named Andre who does, over the store at the store or whatever. So they reached out to me, and I remember meeting with them, talking about it. And at the time it was like, they didn't really pay you much. It was, what was it? I think it was $30 for every 15 videos.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And their goal was they didn't care too much about the quality. They just wanted to knock out as many videos as possible, because to them, they got paid by video. So the more videos they produced, the more money they made. And so as long as we shot it and it looked okay, it was good. So the first time we shot, I want to say we did 6 to 8 sessions, and each session was 15 tricks, or at least 15 videos, because I had to break some of them into 2 to 3 parts, like Spirit Bomb, stuff like that. I would break up White Buddha. Yeah. And so when we shot them, they were all literally one takes.
That is
much
insane.
Gosh, much the way my voice is probably starting to go in this podcast episode, because I'm overtaking it and talking as much as I am. Sorry.
No, it's good.
You can hear my voice progress as you get to the tricks, and it gets drier and raspier. Because we shot like, probably not 100, but we did shoot then. I think it was like 90 videos. I think it was 90 videos total. And I'm pretty sure every single video was one take, just all worked, because I was teaching at the store so much. I knew how to teach the tricks in and out. And I didn't really, if you watch the videos, I make mistakes constantly. But that's also how I taught at the store. I would make mistakes, and I would talk through the mistake while I was doing it. And sometimes the mistake that I made was a way to showcase, how to do something better or whatever. And I would try and build off that. And again, it was just kind of their workflow. So I remember shooting all those anyways, and coming out of that and thinking, well, no one's going to learn off those, because like they're no good. And like, I just didn't think they were going to be anywhere near the quality, or the understanding that people needed to learn yo-yo tricks. It just probably wasn't going to be it. So, the videos went out there. We actually eventually, probably 6 months later, got together and shot a second series, which is we did a different division. So 2A, a 2A series, a 4A series, a 5A series. I never shot a 3A series because 3A has never really been my forte out of all the divisions. I can do every other division fairly well, but not 3A. And so we did that. And I also shot some more advanced tricks at the time too. I think that's when I think even up through Superman or something like that. I can't remember. So again, the videos went out there because even at the time, I don't think many people were learning from the first series of videos yet, because it was just, the internet was new. Nobody was really on it yet, learning yo-yo tricks. And Expert Village was out there. I was still working for Yo-Yo Jam. And over time, I would just start getting emails from people more often, telling me, hey, I just want to let you know I'm learning from your videos. I have this question about this trick. You know, it was very natural. People would be constantly asking me about how to do this, how to do that, da, 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 da. And so it kind of naturally grew into me realizing like, oh, okay, there is a demand for people wanting to learn online. And it was interesting. The first time I sat down to talk to the dude who was going to film me for the Expert Village videos, I met him at a coffee shop and we were sitting talking about like, you know, what it was going to be. And he's like, yeah, like the whole idea with this is not really the money, because you're not really making much money. It's all about trying to promote what it is you do and you know, and I'm like, okay, I don't really know what I'm going to promote about myself, but okay. And he's like, yeah, you should throw a website down. And I had a very good memory of writing mastermagic.net down and then like thinking about it for a minute and going, oh, I wish I had a site that was more like a yo-yo site, you know? And I'm like thinking like, man, what would be a good name, you know? And then I saw like, you know, it's expert, you know, man, expert's a great word. Like expert's a really good word. Yeah. I wonder if like yo-yo expert is a word that I could register for a domain. And like, while I'm sitting at the coffee shop, like I Google it and look it and go, oh, hey, it's open. So I'm like, okay, register and then throw down yo-yo expert. And I mean, that was a long time ago too. Because I started Yo-Yo Expert in 2008 and I'm pretty sure those videos were 2005. Yeah. So, you know, I own the domain name, but I didn't do anything with it for many years. So eventually, again, so the videos went out there 2005, 2006, people started learning from them. And by 2007, 2008, I realized, okay, there's a need for not only people learning, but people having a central place where information was properly presented and organized. And that they did have a place to come and ask me questions that was a little more straightforward, because people would find me in a roundabout way through Yo-Yo Jam or through the forums or whatever. But this was a much easier central place. And I had always, again, I was big into tech. I've always been big into tech. And I was always big into community and forums. And I used to like just build forums for people constantly because I was always excited about ways to connect with people. And again, this was way before Facebook was what it is today. Twitter was new at the time. I remember having to explain to people what Twitter was on the forum, because we would have a contest trying to promote people following us on Twitter, you know, and people are like, what's Twitter? And it's like, well, it's this thing. And, you know, so like,
it's crazy how early you jumped into everything. Just before you go a little bit further, a question I had is that when you create, because I learned almost exclusively off the Expert Village tutorials. I didn't learn it off the Expert Village site. I learned it off when they posted it up onto YouTube.
Yep.
But anyway, the question still stands. Did you put a lot of time and effort into kind of planning out the curriculum? Because you explain things in a very sequential, logical way. So it's like how to string up the yo-yo and then how to... It flows very nicely. And this thing sounds like you kind of pumped it all out. But did you give a thought to the structure and the sequence to when you taught what?
Oh, yeah, huge. So, you know, from the very beginning, it goes back to our yo-yo classes. You know, I'm teaching every day. And to me, I always understood the importance of learning one thing before you learn the next thing. And that it's very true to this day, even with the crazy unresponsive yo-yos that we have. I just finished redesigning like the trick list for A to Z that we use at Yo-Yo School. And I've kind of like redistributed the tricks to refocus on certain things that I think are important. And it's, you know, there are certain things. So for example, We still teach the basics, a sleeper, rock the baby. One of the tricks I have on our beginner list right now is stop and go. And one of the reasons for that is it does a couple of things. It teaches the brain twister mount before they can do brain twister. But it also, you have to have a really strong throw to do stop and go.
Yeah.
And it also teaches you orientation of the yo-yo when you're having to pull the yo-yo back down and stuff like that. Certain things like that. Even, with rock the baby is still a very crucial trick because, you have to have a string formation lined up. You have to have a yo-yo spinning in a very correct orientation. You want to bring it up in front of your face. You really want to hold it and watch where it's going. And you want it to you want it to move in the direction the yo-yo is spinning. And if you focus on the elements and explain all of that, it really builds and helps with the next trick in the list or whatever. And I've always been very focused on like what builds off each other to help you learn best. Because if you leave certain tricks out and you don't teach them, it makes certain tricks harder when you hit them. And so I've over time, I've kind of figured out, at least in my opinion, where those holes are and how to try and fill them in. And so, yeah, when the Expert Village stuff, for sure. So each session was 15 videos. And so when I built out and laid out like what I would teach, it was exactly how I taught at our classes at the time. Of course, leaving off the looping stuff. But it was, those, when I threw together all the tricks that were there, it was the first time someone had organized the tricks in that way, because the tricks were out there, but no one had really laid them out in that format. And it was just from me teaching at the classes, because we had our 3 levels, we had 3 basic levels, which did still include those looping tricks. But then once you got past that, we still had a need to teach people, even when they were on our demonstration team, what to do next. And so I was still kind of that main teacher. And so I would still have to try and figure out how to teach those people who were getting on our team how to compete and how to get to the next level. Because again, that was our goal. We wanted to create people who could go and compete and have fun and progress. And so it was always in front of me, like, how do you get people to that level that you want them to get to? And it's all about, which tricks do you teach first and what builds off each other. And so again, yeah, it was very natural. It was just kind of came out of what I was already doing. So
yeah, that's awesome that you kind of like broke that down, because something that I have had trouble with when trying to teach younger players how to do things is that they lack these necessary kind of prerequisite tricks, and then they don't understand the combo I'm trying to teach them because it's based off this other basic combo, and it just creates this huge mess. And I was like, yeah. If I was just wondering if that was something you thought about.
The saddest move that's been lost to me is magic drop.
Oh my
because
goodness.
nobody can do magic drop. And it makes me so sad, because there are some amazing tricks that if you know magic drop that you can pull, you can do with it. Oh my
God. I have, this is, oh my gosh. So I'm passionate about this topic. So I as you know, I use your tutorials, and that's where I learned my stuff. But
right.
Something that a lot of people don't really know about me is I am an incredibly slow learner. So what it takes, and especially when you kind of hang around like the top competitors, these guys break down tricks just by looking at them. Like, I'm not like that.
Sure.
I need someone to break it down for me. Anyway, magic drop was just one of those tricks I didn't get. I didn't understand how it worked. I watched the tutorial over and over. I didn't get it. And it took me about 2 years until I found this video where it was, I can't remember who it was, but this Japanese guy, and he just angled his hand in a way that you were doing in your video, but I didn't see it clearly at the time. And then when I figured out the way he was angling his hand, I was like, oh my God, wait, I figured it out. And I was inspired. So I basically, one of the videos I am most proud of on my entire channel is a video called How to Do Magic Drop for Dummies. And it's this idea of like, if you've watched Andre's tutorial and still can't do it, watch this one and you just might be able to find it.
Awesome. I mean, I have to admit, like, magic drop, I still am not the best at teaching it. And it's funny because I still remember teaching somebody how to do it and figuring out a way to teach it that was really good. And I'm going to have to go watch your video now. So I'm very curious what you say.
Yeah,
because it's still a hard trick to teach, and it's still a hard trick to learn. But it is there is a core component to it that is so good if you can learn it, that bleeds into everything else. So I mean, to me, the biggest thing that has been lost is or not lost, because some people do it and get into it, but when you learn on a responsive yo-yo, you have to be so smooth, because otherwise the yo is going to snap back to you in the middle of the trick. And so, you always had to keep the yo-yo moving. You couldn't just stop, especially if you were doing a trick where there was any backspin at all. The yo-yo had to continue moving in that direction. And in order to do that, like, it just creates this flow from one transition to the next transition. And so you can usually tell if somebody, by looking at how they play, if they, when they started, just based on that a little bit. Some people totally break through that though. And one of the most recent players that was really doing that was, I think it's Tyler Venue. Art, he really blew my mind when I watched him, because he has that smoothness that blew my mind. And, another good example recently is if you watch Mark Montgomery. Right now he's like, posting Instagram stories, and he's being pretty innovative in terms of like how he's starting to break down tricks and stuff. And it's a little jumpy if you watch him right now, in certain ways, because he's creating, and that's what creating looks like when you first start doing it. But if you watch for a long time, you'll see the smoothness in the movements. And a lot of that just comes from all of us learning on responsive yo-yos. It creates the smoothness and flow. And that is something that, unless you play responsive or have grown up playing responsive, it's sometimes hard to develop.
Is that,
but yeah,
in your opinion, like, let's say someone who started off with the Yo-Yo Jam legacy. So I always started off with, 100% unresponsive. And then I went and maybe got myself an old freehand zero with fresh friction stickers. And I tried to play with that. Do you think that would be something I could learn to develop, or is it more or less?
Yeah, totally. I mean, one of the things that's happening is responsive is back in, yeah,
that's true.
One of, like One Drops had huge success with it. Core has had huge success with it, with, all their slim lines that are responsive. It's become a thing people acknowledge is good, is to be able to play with a slim line yo-yo that snaps back to your hand. So yeah, I mean, I think it's happening. People acknowledge it, and it's fun to play responsive, and also fixed axle play. It's the same thing. In order to do tricks on fixed axle, you have to be smooth. And so it's there. It's happening. And I think it's been a really positive contribution to yo-yo, is all this fixed axle-esque things.
Just going back to the roots.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, I went on a huge tangent, but with Yo-Yo Expert, after the, you've created the central repository where people can buy yo-yos, hang out. What is it like, creating something like that?
You mean like, how does it feel to have created, or what is it like creating it?
More or less like you've created this entire e-commerce store around yo-yos, of all things. And was it, I mean, I guess, with like a yo-yo company, I can imagine how hard it would be to kind of tap into this smaller market and, try to make a living out of selling yo-yos. And here you are creating this huge retail site. So how much work did it take to kind of get to Yo-Yo Expert to the level it is now?
Well, when I first started, like I mentioned in the beginning too, I was big into tech, big into computers, big into website building, whatever. It was kind of like a hobby. And at the time, when we first started, Well, coming out of college, I was just starting grad school, and I did a year of grad school. And my wife at the time was just graduating from college. And so we were hitting this point where we were both going to be out of college. And I had done a year in grad school at that time, and I was getting burnt out on school because I had jumped into this master's program, like I mentioned, neuroscience. And it was a lot of coursework, but also a lot of research work. And while I liked the research work, it wasn't, it was burning me out. I wasn't really having as much fun as I thought I would. And certain aspects of it were difficult because I didn't have background in the type of research I was doing at the time. So I had a lot of catching up to do in certain aspects. And so I realized that, and I was like, oh, like I just don't really want to be doing this research stuff right now. So for me, Yoyo was like this great tool to try and procrastinate working on school. And so like any downtime or any not downtime, but time when I was supposed to be writing research papers or doing research work or whatever, I'd be like, well, I'm just going to like work on the website for a little bit because this is a lot more fun right now and a lot more rewarding. And my wife had gone to school for graphic arts, and she was, you know, good at visuals and trying to do things that really made things pop. And so between the two of us, we had built websites for lots of friends and people for various things like art people and photo people or whatever. So we'd gotten pretty good at like figuring out how do you take a website and make it, you know, have an impact. And it just kind of all came together. You know, I had created all the trick videos. I had understood how to teach, and we had the ability to pull together a website and, you know, make it visually dynamic. And on top of it, I had, you know, kind of an interest in the back end programming stuff. So the first actual implementation of e-commerce was hilarious. You know, shopping cart systems weren't really a thing yet. In 2008 they were, but they were still pretty robust and kind of convoluted, and not many people, you know, it was still very new, you know. I still remember at the time, there just wasn't a winner, because like right now a lot of people use very few shopping cart systems and they do all sorts of fancy things and whatever, and you know, it just wasn't really there yet. So and they also all looked the same too. They're all pretty ugly, and it was always really important to me that it looked good right from the get-go. My focus was always on experience first. The store was the second part. And actually, when I started Yoyo Expert, my goal was not a store. My goal was teaching. And I had hoped that instead of selling yo-yos, my initial goal was I wanted to buy video equipment and film DVDs, and ideally sell people tutorials that they could learn on. And ideally it would pay the player, you know, for those tutorials, and encourage them to develop new tricks to teach. That was kind of my big goal. And the yo-yo, like selling yo-yos, was more of a way to try and get there and build a skill set and whatever. And anyways, yeah. So the first few pages we built were all on a Perl script. It's like a programming language.
Okay.
Like I hard coded in like the name of the product and the price, and it, and the Perl script like added everything up and shot it to a credit card authorizer. And I had like installed my own, you know, SSL certificate, and I had done all this custom stuff, and like the order came to my email. You know, it was all like super, like there was no inventory because again, there was no database. It was just like all code. But it worked, you know, it worked. Like people could click and they could buy a yo-yo if they wanted. And so it's a very small, slow start. And then eventually over time, like it started working, you know, people would find the site and they'd learn and they would buy a dark magic. And so I found one of the guys who had initially created the Perl script I was using, a component of it, and he had developed a database add-on to it. And so I got that installed and running so I could actually maintain an inventory. And so that kind of started working, and then it just continued to evolve. I eventually switched over to a full kind of e-commerce platform, but it was still a very customizable one, and I was able to kind of keep the look on everything.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, the goal initially was really teaching. The store was always second, and I kind of got lucky in the sense that I had worked in a store selling products. I always understood the importance of experience, and I always understood the importance of story behind what it is that people are buying. And I mean, to this day, to me too, it's really important that there's depth to a product. Yeah. Depth comes in many different ways. I mean, to me, I really love it when a yo-yo has both visual depth, aesthetically, but also to the story in the background. I was listening to your podcast that you just did with Jeffrey Payne, and Jeff understands that better than anybody. Yeah, that the story behind the yo-yo is so crucially important to developing like a connection with the person who's buying it, and that's really what you want, because you want someone to buy this thing and feel connected and feel that it is special, because it is like it has a story. Yeah. So that all kind of led back into like, I got that. I always understood that it was important to have that story. And between visuals and everything else, we were able to kind of tell that story through Yo-Yo Expert. I think at least when we were doing it better than many people could with websites the way that they were run at the time. So
yeah, absolutely. Just an add-on question to that, something I'm curious about, and this might dig into specifics a little bit, but what did your shipping logistics look like at the early days of Yo-Yo Expert?
Yeah, well, when we first started, it's like any small operation. I had like a drawer underneath my desk, like in our first apartment, with like 6 dark magics in it. And I would sell the 6 dark magics and restock the 6 dark magics and sell 6 more dark magics and restock the 6 dark magics. And, it was like super small scale. Yeah. Eventually kind of like anything I made, I would just put right back into the building the business. I wasn't really living off the business. It would just, the goal was to just continue to build it. Again, ideally to buy a really nice video camera. That was my goal at the time, but again, it just continued to take off. And so eventually we built up enough inventory in our apartment that it was like, okay, well, not much room to like live and have like this inventory. So, and we also, at the time, my brother had just graduated high school, and he was like kind of looking for a job. And so I was like, oh, this would be great. Like, and I was still in school. Obviously I was still in school. I was still in grad school, and I was also a teaching assistant at grad school for the psychology department. So I would have to go to the school. I was doing 20 hours of TA work every week. Plus I was taking classes and doing research.
No wonder
so I was
you being
pretty busy.
Out.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, it was all good though. It's all stuff I enjoyed. It wasn't a bad burnout. And I was still, I think at times I was still working at the toy store even. For a little bit of it, I was still doing some of Yo-Yo Jam's customer service stuff too. So moving in lots of directions with everything. So I needed help with the shipping part of it anyways. So yeah, so my brother started working for us, and that's when we kind of needed need a little bit more room, and moved to another apartment that had like a separate, area where we kind of put everything in. And then we kind of outgrew that as well too. And there was an awesome office space walking distance from where we were living at the time, which was in Amherst, Massachusetts, which was where we both went to school. And so that was great, because I actually didn't have a car either. I would have to I still remember I took the bus into town with packages and bags and stuff, because I would still ship on certain days, like on the weekends and whatever. So I'd trudge through the snow. I remember carrying boxes to the post office and dropping them off and whatever. So we had an office that was a pretty cool office space there for think at least 5 years or so, maybe not 5 years, maybe 3 years. And then we moved to where we are still to this day, which is this really cool mill building in East Hampton, Massachusetts. And we have a nice big space where we got room for storage and desks and a place to do photos and a place to do video. And, you know, we got what we need for room and shipping and everything. It's awesome. So
yeah,
we're very thankful.
I was curious because I actually had the good fortune of visiting the Yo-Yo Expert warehouse. While I was down, this would have been in 2015. I was staying with Eric Kolosky and I attended MA States.
I remember that.
And I just...
So which one did you visit then?
I can't remember. It would have been, I can't remember, but it was a very big looking warehouse, as big as yo-yo stuff goes. And I could just look at the entire thing and I was just like, wow, I'm in yo-yo heaven.
What year was it?
This was 2015.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So it was definitely where we are right now. Yep.
Yeah. And it was this huge like warehouse. And I was like looking at things. I'm like, wow, this is what it looks like on the back end of stuff. And I just remembered it looked so surreal.
That's awesome.
I'm, you know, we've just almost gone for 2 hours. And I think the last question I have for you is, what are you doing right now? Like, what are your projects looking like? What is a main priority for you right now? You have a family, you have 2 businesses now, you eventually, you know, overtook the A to Z learning store. What's a goal for you right now?
Goal is to keep everything running and don't burn down around me. But no, I mean, I'm still very much all in on yo-yo. It's what makes me happy. Like, my true passion is yo-yo and the toy store. So we are 4 years now in ownership of the toy store. And, you know, it's funny when you first, you know, take over another business like that too, it was, there's a lot of learning, and it goes up and down too, in terms of like, okay, we got this under control. And then like, oh boy, got it still up to learn. And it kind of goes up and down like that too. And so in the past 4 years, and halfway through that, we had our second child. My daughter's almost 2. She'll be 2 this summer. And my son will be 6 this summer. And so thanks. Yeah, it's great. I mean, being a father is definitely amazing, on top of being able to have a business and stuff like that. It's really neat. But yeah, it's challenging. I don't always feel like, I'm able to keep up with all of the projects that I want to keep moving forward the way I want to keep them moving forward. But I'm also very lucky in the sense that they all work well together. So, you know, the toy store, we still teach yo-yo classes 3 days a week. Most recently, like I mentioned earlier, we kind of rebooted our trick program. And so I've been like more in person, hands-on teaching at the classes. And that really helps get me back to that perspective of what it is like to put a yo-yo in person's hands in person, which gives you information that's like really important to teaching. And when I first started Yo-Yo Expert 2008, the internet was a very, very different place. And it was, you know, much more 2-dimensional. Websites were flat, and you know, they were like, in the sense that like you would visit and you would click, and there was very, you know, you would drill down and stuff like that. And today, they're very dynamic in so many different ways. One of them being just like, they're dynamic in terms of information. Like you and Facebook, you like, it just always is there. Like, it's, you know, you're always scrolling. There's always information. There's always new content, you know, like that was not how websites worked back when I started. And, you know, they're also, we look at websites through so many different viewports, which, you know, you're looking at a phone, you're looking at an iPad, you're looking at a computer, and within all the different phones we use too, they're all different scales. And so everybody's experience with a website is all very, very different. And I've always had a vision for how I wanted people to interact with our website. And one of the difficult things that's happened is because of smartphones and all of this different things, it's very difficult to maintain experience across the platforms and for everybody. And like to have websites load efficiently and fast, but still be dynamic and interesting. Very difficult balance to maintain. And we relaunched Yoyo Expert's website to be, kind of compatible with it's called responsive design. Responsive design, meaning that no matter which device you're on, everything reformats itself to be visually appropriate for the size of the device that's looking at. So all the images resize, everything jumps around. Like you might have on your computer, you might have an image on the left and text on your right. And on your phone, the image stacks on top of the text. And so it's very hard to tell a story the way you want to tell it.
Yeah.
If everything's jumping around like that. And so I struggled with that when we rebooted our website. I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago. I think it was about 3 years ago now, with the responsive layout. So since we've done that, I learned a lot doing that in terms of like responsive design, because it was kind of new to me at the time. And so in the past couple of years, I've really put a lot of energy in thinking, because I always had a vision for how I wanted Yoyo Expert to be. And I really hit that vision, in 2010, 2011. I had everything displayed the way I wanted, interact the way I wanted. There were always certain things I wanted to do better in terms of like teaching and trick structure and breakdowns that I was never able to do, mainly because of technology and stuff at the time. And I think the technology is all here. So I'm very excited because I've been working behind the scenes to kind of reboot the site with all those different elements and pull it together. So there is a reboot coming, and that has definitely been taking a huge amount of my both mental energy and actual real energy and time. And yeah, I mean, I'm moving in every direction possible between, being a father of 2 kids and having a toy store that's awesome. But it does take a lot of time and energy because the toy store itself is pretty big. We have over 10,000 items we stock. We have 20 categories of toys. And within those categories, each category has 5 or 6 subcategories. And we sell arts and crafts and puzzles and science and tech and toddler toys and, baby and books and games. And so I live in lots of different realms and worlds, but they do all bleed into each other. And so, right now I jump around, but my main focus in the past year has definitely been Yoyo Expert and rebuilding a website. And I have some things I'm personally really excited about in terms of teaching that I can't wait to kind of get out there.
Yeah.
I had a lot of ideas in my head on how to teach better through the internet. And I feel like I'm getting close to being able to introduce it and stuff like that. So lots of good stuff to come.
It sounds super, super exciting. And I guess, when someone has been teaching for as long as you have, you kind of have this very practical, tried and true approach to getting the information and communicating it across in a way that people can absorb it, I suppose.
Yeah, thank you. It's the hope. I mean, I'm always a student as well. I'm always learning. And to this day, like tricks, there's always a new trick to learn, right? And so I'm always learning myself, and I always try and learn from myself learning. Because much like you, I am not a fast learner when it comes to tricks. I sometimes, and it's one of the reasons I feel like sometimes I'm a better teacher, is because I struggle with things quite a bit more than most other people struggle with them. And so therefore I know what everyone else will struggle with, because I struggled with it already for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So therefore I can take those elements.
Yeah. That has been something that has been an odd side effect of my slow learning. It's that whenever I, if for instance, back to that magic drop tutorial, I had to wrestle with that myself, and I made every single mistake one could make when trying to do this simple 2-string hit element. So when you've been through it yourself, it's easy to kind of see where other people are going to go wrong. But Andre, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for agreeing to jump onto this. And we spoke for almost 2.5 hours.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No. And I'm so sorry for taking this much of your time. And, you're an incredibly busy guy.
No, I love to talk yo-yo and don't always get to do it as much as I want. So it's like a great excuse to be able to talk yo-yo. And, much the same to you, I have a lot of respect for you and what you've created. And we really, what you do in the world of yo-yo adds depth to yo-yo. And like, we really need more people doing what you do. And in all the realms that you do it in too, because I know you do YouTube and you do the reviews, and the podcast I feel like is a really great next step too. And it's just kind of giving yo-yo this added, again, depth. It's this added interesting underlying levels that shows the culture. And shows the stories, tells the stories. And it's making it relatable to people, which is just so important, because that is something that yo-yoing hasn't always had a lot of people doing enough of. And I think, we're at a great time with the internet where people can connect so easily and so fast.
100%.
That it's never been easier to do that. And so people are stepping up. You're definitely seeing a lot of people kind of starting to fill those gaps. But I think you have been a true leader of that and been far in advance of a lot of people doing it. And the fact that you're continuing to do it and then move into new directions, like with the podcast and stuff. It's great. So thank you for doing it as well.
That means a lot to me. Thank you so much for that. But yeah, absolutely. It's been a complete pleasure this entire episode. And I guess if anyone wants to find you on social media, where would they find you, or how would they best get in contact with you?
Yeah. So I still quite often am answering the direct messages through Yoyo Expert. So it's easy to find me. It's at Yoyo Expert, whether that's YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Not that anyone uses Twitter. What else is there out there? All the realms. I do have other like Andre Boulay accounts, obviously. So you can look me up on Facebook under Andre Boulay, and I'm there. And I do have an Instagram, which is Andre Boulay. It's mostly just random pictures of my kids so far. But I might eventually turn that into more of a well-rounded yo-yo family-focused account. So,
well, it's awesome. I mean, I guess you have to try and draw the line somewhere, and boost up the family photos.
Right. Well, yeah, I guess sure you're still human, right? Not just a yo-yo machine.
Absolutely love this. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.